escaping the matrix is a two-phase. And I realized early on that a big part of my escaping that matrix, in other words, working the corporate game, working for a career that didn't sustain, and working for a business that clearly didn't have your best interests, was realized. I realized that a few short years before I actually retired. Now it's a two-phase deal, and that's clearly what I found. I realized there's the trigger, there's that element, that component, that moment in your time, in your life, that you realize you're done. It's over. And then there's the second part where you actually pull the trigger, where the company lets you go. Maybe they don't like the work you're doing. Maybe it's ageism. Maybe you've retired and you're doing it voluntarily. For whatever reason, the second phase is when we actually make it happen. We put rubber to the road. But there's that other moment before that where we finally have that trigger where we switch. And we say, look, I'm trucking along through my life. I'm cruising through career. I'm making all this big impact. I'm living life. I'm building a house. I'm buying the cars. I'm doing all these things. And then all of a sudden, click, it triggers for you. And you wonder, why? Why is this happening? Why am I doing this? And why do I even care? Because for me, that is a two-phase deal. And for a lot of you, you're probably finding that's exactly the same storyline. It's not just one day you wake up and you retire, I'm ready to retire, and then you go in and tell the boss I'm out of here. It's rarely that happens. I've heard some people say, I know one of my wife's bosses many years ago said, when I have 3 consecutive bad days, that's when I give my notice. And he was a long-standing, upper scale manager kind of in that business that they were in. And he loved his work. He lived and breathed it. He was the person there that was 5 o'clock in the morning, turning the coffee on in the office, and everybody else starts rolling in at 7:30, 8 o'clock. He was always the first one in and the last one out. He lived and breathed it. And I took a lesson from that, a lesson that, how can somebody live their work like that? Like, it's one thing if you're building a small business, and I realized that later on. There's a couple of components to this. You work because you have to, or you work because you want to. And working for some corporation or for some big company that really can here today, gone tomorrow, can send you down the road at the drop of a hat, you're there because you have to. And realistically, there's no loyalties. And I realized that a few short years ago. I did realize that when I started seeing the company I was working for start to send people packing. And so what I did come to realize was I was loving my career. The work I was doing, I was loving being, involved in a lot of very technical, electrical, high voltage type work. I started out more so in the field on the, hands-on type applications. And then I transitioned into sort of a leadership role, you could say. My technical aptitude took me to, even in my mind, I could have potentially pursued, more technical roles, maybe not so much analysts, but certainly people, advisors and that types of roles. I was certainly looking at those types of roles within the organization because I loved the work. I loved the industry. I loved that type of technical work. Like that really did get me going. And for many years, I loved doing it. I loved understanding, 3-phase energy power. I loved understanding fault conditions and arc flash potential. And I loved understanding the industry of high voltage. I loved it. And I loved the volatility of it, the safety margins. I loved the just the very idea of what it does for us today and how, we started from a place where somebody learned how to, light up a light bulb to where now we're pushing all kinds of major equipment in industry and operating it with a lot of this power. We use power in our homes. I have the light on here. And we all take it for granted. We all, assume that electrical is just there. We know it's not. I mean, it's generated somewhere. It's created from either coal or natural gas or what have you. They create a big pile of power, distribute it out to different areas. and then they step it down to a lower voltage so we can use it in our homes. So we get that. That's the logistics of the electrical industry. And for me, it was very exciting to understand how that all worked, how we got from A to B, and then how, the history of it and the application. And I really, really loved the idea of it. And so it was a passion for me for quite some time. But then, as time goes on, you get into the you get into the, the game of, organizational structure. You get into the game of the corporate world. Then it becomes more of a game. And those ideas of what got you into your work. And, I loved my work. But then sort of some of these other things start to get into the way. They started filtering their way in. It's almost like politics. You want to ignore it, but it somehow always makes their way into your life. And as much as you can ignore it, it somehow just becomes a part of how you live, and whether you like it or not. And maybe for a while you can even avoid the impacts. And in many cases, what happens down in, the federal leadership levels, whether it's, Canada, US, doesn't matter what country, what they make decisions, at the headquarters, whether it's Parliament Hill or whatever, it doesn't seem to really matter until it matters, until there's a big taxation applied to you, until there's something major that hits you and it has that impact. Till then, it's just status quo. It's different players. They're just moving different pawn pieces around that chess player, that chess set. And politics really I never cared. Neither did the corporate game really matter to me. It was just a job, but I was there because I loved the type of work. I loved the electrical work, and that's why I was there, fully engaged, loving the work activity that I did. But as time gone on, they start feeding you with, the corporate rhetoric, the corporate noise, the brainwashing, the games, the proper speak. They send you to training seminars, how to talk in a group and setting. And some of that's great. There's things like Toastmasters, and, I was strongly encouraged to. I remember we went to a leadership forum, and there was something like, I think there was about 600 or 700 leaders. So everything from, managers, directors, senior people, senior VPs, right to the CEO. They were all in the room. Okay, there was about 600 in the room at the time. They did this in 3 or 4 segments, so they split it up. But I was in there, and the group I was with, we had to do a little brainstorming. And when you finished your brainstorming activity, somebody was voted the person that had to present it. So here, all of a sudden, table 22, the lady comes running over. You're in this massive boardroom. Lady, everybody points towards me. They're like, you can deliver that. Lady comes running over with a microphone, sticks the microphone in my face. What's your answer, table 22? So I had to stand up. I had to present this. I had to sound like I wasn't a total idiot. And I had to present our case study that we were doing at the table individually. We had to do these breakout rooms. And I had to do this big presentation in front of all these senior leaders. And, you always sound ridiculous when you're on a microphone and you hear your voice over a multiple speakers, and it's a different feeling. And I was quite nervous and borderline shaky, but I got through it, and everybody said, hey, great job, great presentation, thank you very much. At that moment, with all the attaboys, I felt like I was on top of the world. Shortly thereafter, I was interviewed for, corporate presentations. They put on these internal corporate banners and these segmented commercials and these things that they do. And they had interviewed me. They said, hey, Mark, come on over to the side here. Let's do a little interview. We'll ask you a few questions. Give us your candid approach. I was at the top of the world then at that time. So I did the presentation. Then I was doing interviews. Then on top of it, I was becoming flushed into different groups, if you will, different committees, subcommittees. As I mentioned before, I was part of a subcommittee, or I was actually the chair of that subcommittee to develop new enhanced safety procedures for, racking out switchgear and breakers to make it safer for the field workers. So I developed that. I wrote the language. We came up with the current technology and sort of how we can sort of amend some of that current technology. And then we were going to write the language and rules and how we were going to implement that into the organization as the subcommittee. And, I was leading that team. We had a team of some very well invested people that were smart, technical, and also passionate. And, in that world, being part of these committees, being part of, these communications and being part of all of this, it had a way of just making you feel like you were on the top of the world. And I did. I felt like I was definitely on top of the world. But then, as time goes on, status quo, you get back into your world, the grind, it keeps going on and on. Then it becomes a little bit less rewarding, if you will. And I don't mean rewarding in a monetary sense, but rewarding, psychologically. You just, after time goes by, that all settles out. Nothing seems to change. Then all of a sudden, organization makes some changes. And it's pretty interesting how that's all it takes sometimes is have the wrong person, the wrong boss, the wrong manager, leader, how much that can have an impact on your life and your mental health and ultimately trickle into your physical health too. And that's exactly what I started to find. I started to find, exclusive experiences. For example, our direct supervisor would go out and take some of our peers out for lunch regularly, and we wouldn't be invited. So there's a couple of us that felt a little excluded, and that never helps, never helps a person's kind of mental health when you see this go on, and you're back there holding down the fort. You grin and bear it because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and maybe there's some other conversations that need to happen behind certain doors. That's fine. But this became more of a trend, and this was going on and on. Then you get more of these changes in the organization, things that were happening that aren't impacting in a good way. People are getting laid off, people are getting shuffled, people are being passed off for promotions. There was times when, of course, the company says, hey, here's a new phone. The first time we got that new cell phone, we thought, wow, this is great. Company's giving us a new phone. We don't even have a phone. This is awesome. Yeah, and by the way, you can use it for your own personal, no worries, no harm, no foul. Well, that you can use it for personal use. Transition to, well, by the way, we're going to have to take this special training course so you understand what the ins and outs and the limits of use. Because that all now falls within the some of the rules and the stipulations of use within the organization. Then they start telling you that they're tapping the lines, that they're tracing your texts and emails, and things like that. Well, you understand the premise and why they do that because there's probably a lot of insider information flying around, and some of it has to be under the radar. Just this constant barrage of these types of things, right? Hey, you're being watched. Big Brother's watching you. They're watching this. Then their performance conversations. Then they changed the structure. It went from a place where everybody basically got great results, reviews, and the end of the year represented more of, hey, a great summary, attaboy, good job, you did a wonderful job this year, keep it up. To a place of, we're holding everybody to full account. So accountability started ringing into the conversations. More and more talks about you're being watched, you're being held fully accountable. Then you have a supervisor like I did where he said that, you know what, if anything comes your way, if you make a decision and it's not the right one, I'm going to step aside and you're going to wear it. So you have all these different new thoughts, new CEOs, new management, and all these new communications that are telling you that, wait a minute, those things that you used to love about your work, it doesn't matter if it's electrical or what it is, it doesn't matter. You're being watched. You're being held fully accountable. We're keeping an eye on things, and we're going to rate you very aggressively at the end of the year, which coincidentally that changed. And it was changing in a big way. So all of these things start to take away, sort of, overshadow those passions that I had for the work that I once loved. And so now as a leader of a team, I found myself quite often in an environment now where the expectations were raised on them. Naturally, you do take your work home. The expectation, of course, is those phones, you're going to be on, basically, you're going to be on call 24/7. Now, they would never say that because that goes against labor codes and all kinds of things. But realistically, the manager basically said to me, Mark, you've always got to be available for your people. But guess what? Our people and a lot of my team were on call 24/7 but they would rotate out, right? Some of them would be on call 24/7, and then the next week would be somebody else, the next week would be somebody else. So they got their break. But as the supervisor, you got those calls every week. You get them at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night. You got them call on a Friday at 5:30. Sometimes people wouldn't answer their phone for backup, and I'd go in the backup and I'd support the team because I felt like that's what, that was part of the game. That was part of what I did as a supervisor. I would show my best foot forward and certainly help out as best as I can. And I loved helping the team, and I loved getting back out there in the field. So if there was a problem that was imminent, maybe something catastrophically failed, and if there's a way I could get out to the field, at least to come and help out, I'd love to do that. And I did that many times. But that didn't seem to matter. The expectations continued to rise. You're fully accountable. The goods that you do don't even come close to all the things, the drawbacks. Your team maybe didn't succeed in these ways. Maybe they had some good years here, but they didn't meet in these elements. You fail. And of course, as a leader of a team, the leader takes the hit, which is fine. That's what we sign up for. But this overall change in perspective of, I love my work. I have a passion for this type of work, reminded me with this new changing evolutionary life in the corporate game that didn't matter what the passion was. It's overshadowed, overcome, and overrun by new corporate policies, procedures, expectations, accountabilities. And realistically, that changed my life forever. Because I was never there anymore for just the good of trying to do the right thing, trying to help out the team, trying to find success, trying to keep everybody safe. It wasn't about that anymore. It was a numbers game. It was about meeting the numbers on paper, the KPIs for all the seniors. It was about painting the right picture, but it wasn't about doing it necessarily safely. It was about doing it in a way that would meet certain, managerial expectations. And, naturally with that, like everything, the corporate, workload continues to climb, and reductions means you have less support from every corner. And so it became harder and harder to do your core chores and your core job. And you found yourself more trying to manage these expectations and deliverables and painting the right picture for the right people. It was no longer any more about the passions. And sure, a lot of people out there love their work. I've had lots of people that enjoy their work. They're part of a small team, maybe, a group of 4 or 5 people. They see the same people for the last 20 years. Other than a little bit of internal office politics, like, she's not pulling her weight, or he said something that was a little bit offensive. I mean, generally that's just tit for tat, and most people just get through that. But a lot of those smaller work environments, people are more friendly and they're more inclined and adept to working together and maybe having that brew at the end of the job. But, regardless of whether you're in a small office environment or whether you're in the big corporate game, I've worked all of it. And more of my experiences that were of smaller teams, smaller shops, were often more rewarding. I did in fact start to realize, okay, I'm being held accountable. I'm fully reachable 24/7. There's really no break. But wait a minute. Holidays in 2 weeks. And so we had holidays. Me, my wife, my kids, we love our vacations because it represents, really 3 things. Number 1, to really focus on family time. Okay, it gives us all time to get back together. reignite some chats and have some good talks and, get connected back up with the family. And that's a lovely thing. Number 2, it's to see new places. I've always loved traveling because I love to see a new place, a new site, new cultures. And I love it. One of my favorite places ever was Jamaica. Just such a culturally rich country. I loved it. We had some borderline questionable safety issues when we were there, but I loved it. It was such an interesting country. Been to Mexico, we've been to Europe. I've seen lots of countries there in Europe and all over the US. And, I love traveling. I love seeing different cultures and I love being part of that. And the third was just to get away, because what we realized is we don't have a lot of time. Okay, you work your bag off to the bone, literally. And I don't mean that literally, but I mean, just trying to be cute here. We work hard all year round. Okay, we put in all of this time, all of this effort to be held accountable, to be pushed to a corner, to be work harder, longer, faster, perform. And then, as they say, let them have their cake, right? You've all heard the term, let them have their cake. Work their just basically work them to the bone so there's nothing left, and then give them a nice little pizza party or a nice little piece of cake, and then do a cute little speech at the end of it. And we had lots of that in the corporate game. Lots of these little speeches, lots of these little attaboys, little barbecues. Yeah, let's do a barbecue. Tell them that, And you hear the conversation at the management level, just so they're happy, right? Just let's have a barbecue so they're happy. So they're not, crying over there all the time. I had managers that would say that, and I quote, so they don't cry. And I'm like, well, that's a little disrespectful. I think they work hard. It's great to provide a little bit of extra. Why don't we do more of this kind of stuff? Why don't we show a little bit more? But it's not about what, it's the how. And a lot of them would do it to appease, but not because it was necessarily the right thing to do. It was to appease the masses. And so going on holidays gave you that 2 or 3 weeks off a year. You work so hard all year round. And then you go away, and for us, a couple of years ago, a few years ago, we went to Portugal. We spent, honestly, it was sitting on the patio. And for any of you from, say, the Azores, anybody from Azores, San Miguel, okay, Ponta Delgada, okay, that's the town, okay. Anybody from those areas? If you're from those areas, you'll appreciate what I'm talking about. So if you're Ponta Delgada, so if you're down in the village there's a couple of little beaches. There's the one really small beach. It's kind of more of like a cove. And we were staying on the beach. And there's a second beach a little further down. I mean, there's beaches kind of around the island, but those are kind of the couple of main ones in that area. The smaller one that's like a cove, we were on the one end of it. And there's a house up on the hill. Well, there's a bunch of houses on the ocean there. And we were staying in the one house that had stairs that walked down to the beach. So we would sit up on the patio, literally up on the patio, and I'd sit there and I'd have my beers, and we would sit in there I'd have a little stool, and I'd be watching out at the ocean as the ocean laps in, and you just hear that ocean rush in. And as I'm sitting here having this beer, watching the ocean, thinking to myself, and all the people out on the beach, there's people suntanning, there's little ones screaming, and everybody's having a good time on the beach. The sun's shining, it's about 28 degrees, and it's just perfection. And I'm sitting up there and I'm like, please be a dream that I can live this dream forever. And I would sit there and I would just sit there and dream. And I wish I could never leave that moment. Those are the moments that you realize that's life. And we had a crappy little rental car. I don't know what it was. I don't know. It wasn't a Fiat. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, we had a rental vehicle there. It was manual, little diesel putt-putt. But we didn't have that Lamborghini or that BMW. And we were happy. Now, the house, you could make an argument that it's pretty insane house to be in, but But really, it wasn't so much about the house, because the house in itself wasn't that spectacular. It was pretty small, actually. Pretty rough, and I do remember there being some cockroaches here and there, but realistically, it was really more of just the lifestyle. You see, we'd sit up on the patio having the beer. I'd chat with my wife or the father-in-law, and we'd sit there and have a few giggles and just watch as the ocean rushes in. Then it'd be like, okay, let's put some swim shorts on. Do you want to go do that? Sure. Nobody's in a rush. We just decided, let's put our swim shorts on. Let's mosey on down to the beach. And we would do that. And we'd go lay around on the beach. And the beach was so hot, when you get that dark sand. It wasn't that really bright Cuban beach sand. It was really like a darker sand. So for those of you who know, it was extremely, extremely hot. You pretty much have to walk. And maybe also the Amalfi Coast. If anybody's been to Italy and the Amalfi Coast, it was almost the same way. Where you had this ungroomed sand. It was sand, but it was really dark. I wouldn't say muddy. It was like a darker sand. So it was really hot because the sun on hard, dark sand just it was like coals. So you'd have to walk with your sandals right up to the water's edge. And we had to do that in the Amalfi. I noticed that right across from Maiori, where we stayed. The beach was super dark sand and it was really hot. So you'd have to pretty much, your last step would be out of your sandal right into the water, kind of coming up on the sand, because it was just way too hot. Same thing in Portugal. We had all of that hot sand and it was just wonderful. We loved it. But I started to realize moments, my first time we went to Portugal, and we learned from some of the older Portuguese folks that we met there, some of my wife's family and relatives and cousins and uncles and aunts. And we started realizing from those folks that, life was really more about spending time with family. And these were locals that were living there. If any of them worked, some of them did, some of them didn't. And if they did, quite often they were off work by, it seemed like 2 o'clock, maybe 3 o'clock. They had an hour off for lunch. They started late. They probably put in 4 hours of work a day. And quite honestly, after work, they'd go meet up, have some, red wine and some cheese and bread, and sit and shoot the poop there with each other, play some cards, sit around, talk about the latest. The old men would do that, and the old ladies would be in, doing what they do, and they chat, and, they're talking about the old men, and the old men are talking about, maybe sports or what happened downtown. And, it is such a cool atmosphere. The first time I did that was quite a few years ago. I would say we went to Portugal the first time about 22 years ago, because my oldest daughter was just a baby. No, that was been about 23 years ago. The first time we went there. And that really resonated with me. That really stuck in a way, that the lifestyle of how these folks are living there. And I realized that when we live in North America and we live in this corporate game, we're trapped. I feel like a rat in a cage. Yes, I do. I really literally feel like a rat in a cage. And so coming back from spending a month in Portugal, learning some of the language, eating some of the best corn. Have you ever heard of a place? Well, I'm not even going to try it. The furnace is what I'll call it. The furnace in Portugal, in the Azores. The furnace on San Miguel. They make some of the absolute craziest corn. So anybody come from there know what I'm talking about. They have this corn that they bake in volcanic water, and it's just, Matt, you eat one cob. This corn that we have here in North America is trash. It's weeds compared to their corn. You finish one cob, you're stuffed, and it's sweet. You don't need butter and salt. It's just, spectacular. Everything is on, like everything in Portugal, the scenery, the hills, the greenery, the oceans, the corn, the food, it's all on, it's just on extra loud volume, if I can put that. I don't have the right word for it, but it's spectacular. So the first time I went, about almost 24 years ago now, when our first daughter was at she was just a baby at the time, I realized that, we are in a cage here in North America. And I knew I'd be heading back to a bunch of schedules, busy work. And at that age, I go back 20 years ago, I would have been in my 30s, early 30s. It was okay. I was still feeling pretty good about my work, but I did recognize that was a factor. So I went back to work after a month, and we went back and hustle bustle and go, schedule, hurry, got to be up by 3:30, this, that, and the other. Oh, it's like nuts. So I realized that, what are we doing this for? Why? But, I was still in my life as my early 30s that I really didn't have a way to really change that. I had to head down, ass up, as they say. And I really had to just get her done. You got to keep working, got to keep finding the grind. And there's got to be a better way, but we got to keep going. Like, we had a mortgage, car payment. Like most everybody in America and Canadians, we get into house payments, the car payments. You're trapped. You are literally trapped. And so that's kind of how I felt, trapped. But life went on, and we kept doing this for a while, and the ups and downs, new cars, you buy things to try to fulfill gaps in your life, because the gaps are what? Everybody thinks, I need a new car, I need a new house. But I saw this. My trip to Portugal really opened up my eyes to something different. Sorry. Got a little bit of a sniffle here from being outside. It's a little bit chilly. I got to go blow some snow again here right away. But it's a trap. Because we're not enjoying our lives as much as we could be or should be, we find ourselves having to fulfill these hollownesses in our soul, these gaps in our lives. We need to fill that somehow. And so we do that in other ways. And in North America, we do it with stuffing our face with food, buying big stupid cars that we don't need, like a Cadillac Escalade for $140,000, or a big, 5,000 square foot house when there's two people living in it. This is what people are doing. And a lot of it is, some of it is the Joneses. Some of it's trying to be better than your neighbor. Some of it is just to fulfill this gap of something missing. But me going to Portugal for the first time, I realized, and I don't care, like my wife, she sees it in a different way. She's like, okay, we went on holidays, great. My wife grew up there. She was born and raised there. And so she likes it there. But for me, because it was so new, I loved it there. And I told her right off, like, we should move. Why are we not moving? But anyway, time goes on. We're in our 30s, we're in our 40s, doing our thing. And we did another trip, I would say, to Portugal again. I mean, we did other travels. We've been to Mexico a bunch of times, and Cuba, Jamaica. We've been to a lot of different places, most of which we bring our kids with. Hawaii. Kids haven't been to Hawaii or Jamaica, but they've been to most of the other spots. But realistically, we did another trip, and I would say that was probably about, I want to say 12 years ago, 13 years ago, we did another trip to Portugal. And we thought, okay, this will be fun. Let's do it again. And it was more of the same, but even better. It was a further realization, because now by this time I was in the corporate game, right? When I go into my 30s, I wasn't, but into my 40s, I was. So I was starting to get back into the corporate game, and I started to realize that when we went to Portugal again, we did it for a month again, more again, learning about, what makes the locals tick. And it's life. That's what makes them tick. It's not getting caught up in all the latest and the greatest and the flashiest cars. And I mean, I like cars. Don't get me wrong. So I want to put that out there for anybody. Hey, you like cars. I do like cars. I've always had a big passion for cars, fun cars. But it does make you wonder where those passions come from. Is it filling that gap, or is it because I just love these cars? I don't know. It's probably a bit of both. But I love cars. I do. But you know what? In our 40s, we went there again. So here I was now, about 12, 13 years ago, we went to Portugal again, in the Azores, and spent, again, time on the beach. I had the place again looking down on the ocean. And it was just more reminder. Why? Why would we want to go back to that matrix, that rat race? The matrix is what's destroying people's souls. The matrix is a false sense of something that was conjured up in the industrialized revolution back in decades ago, when we felt like that was the right thing to do, when corporations decided to take advantage of the slaves like us. They could sucker us in with a couple of peanuts, give you some semblance of consistency, longevity in your career, and the ability to earn a small pence to pay for a snack for the end of the day. And this concept evolved. What were people doing 200 years ago? They survived, didn't they? That's what I was starting to see. People have been around. We've been around for thousands of years. What has changed in the last decade, few decades, since the beginning of this industrialized revolution, that puts us in a place where we feel we need to be part of this corporate environment? We were all part of it. I've been part of this. I get it. It was part of, I was suckered in. And I thought that's what I wanted. And I thought that's what I needed. I didn't need that at all. I did it for a while. But you know what? As time went on, and more of this exclusive behavior I started receiving from my managers, closed door meetings, raised expectations without, compensation, being on call constantly. It got to the point where in that midst of that time, I was already starting to build a second home. So we have another house, and you've probably seen a couple videos. I've shared a couple videos out there where I'm out walking around in the woods. That's the second home. I built that years ago. We bought a really dirt cheap piece of land out about an hour west of the city. And it's about an hour west. It's close to one of the major lakes here in our area. So part of the reason we bought it was to transition there to retirement. And the other part was because it was near a lake and we love boating. And so it sort of fit the bill. It was also at a cross juncture where we didn't have to cross a busy highway. It was easy to access. It was fairly close to the city. And so it just checked all the boxes. So we built that house. I built that house probably 10 years ago. We sort of moved into it. We started moving some food and furniture, and we spend a bunch of time out there every given year with the intention of spending even more time out there. You see, we're in this house in the city, and this is where we lived. We've had to base ourselves because, kids growing up and going to school and university and sports. We had to be in the city. We just have to be here to help them kind of support the kids doing what they're doing. But ultimately, the long-term goal is look at moving out to the country, which we've built. We've built that little nest egg out there, a little place that we call home. And honestly, we go out there, and we were just out there at Christmas, and we go there and we sit in the home, and it just feels so much more homey. It just feels so warm, if I can say that. Not literally warm, but it feels warm. It feels like home. This place does not have that same feeling. That place does, because we built it with our blood, sweat, and tears. Blood, sweat, and tears. Kids are out there. They love being out there. My wife loves being out there. I love being out there. We're out there with the wildlife. We've got a chunk of land in the bush. And it's wonderful. And I realized it's when I'm at my most peaceful is when I'm out there at the acreage. And we're all at our most peaceful. People aren't fighting. People aren't squabbling. People are relaxed. There isn't this energy, this fiery energy that we have when we're in the city, where we always feel like we're on edge. There's this feeling and sense of agitation when we're in the city. More importantly, when we're in work mode, because when we're in the city, we're in work mode. We're basically always working. Me, not anymore so much. Again, do I work? Yes. I do my social media. But it's a passion project. It's not a work in the sense of a job, and I am retired. My corporation canned me and retired me and took me out to pension at 55 and said, you're out of here. So in some ways I was lucky, but in the majority of I was ready to go. So there's these two moments that I mentioned earlier. One being when it actually happens, which had happened for me February 28th, 2024, which had actually, and coincidentally in my mind, happened for a couple of good reasons. Number one, because of my mental, physical, and just emotional health. I needed it. I needed to make that change. But the other reason was I was going to do it at 55 anyway, and they helped me along. And this was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. Because there was days where I would drive up to my workplace. I'd look at the office. I could even see in the window. I'd back up to my window because we had parking spaces right next to our office space. And I would back up and I'd sit in my truck watching depressing TikToks, listening to music that would conjure up memories of my dad who just passed away 3 years earlier. And I would think about this and think about the losses in my life. And I'd think about the toxicity that's about to boil over in that office. And I would literally sit in my truck just with this feeling that we take 2 weeks vacation, 3 weeks vacation a year just to come back to this rat race, this matrix. I knew there had to be more. There has to be more. Going to Portugal reminded me that there's always more. It's inspiring because if you think it's too late, it's never too late. I have people on these videos telling me, hey, I moved to Philippines. Everybody's got their place. And, whether it's the Philippines, whether it's Portugal, whether it's Argentina, whether it's whatever, there's always something that we can affect change. And now I truly feel like I'm in such a great spot. But sitting there every single morning before going into work, for those last, I would say, couple of 2 years, especially the last year, it really was a stark reminder to me that this isn't life. To spend 8, 10, 12 hours per day, every day, doing work that's pointless, mind-numbing, heartless in so many cases because we had to, unfortunately, let others go. Here's an irony for you. There's a little fun fact. There's a big organizational shift there about 5, 8, 10 years ago. I don't know. It was one of the bigger ones. And they assigned the senior VP of sort of HR to say, hey, you're going to be in charge. This person is essentially getting rid of everybody. This is the person that is, I don't know, Dr. Death, if you will. And so this person spent the course of the next probably month chopping people from the roster, getting rid of these people. The mass exodus, chopping here, chopping there, layoffs, firing, layoffs, firing, layoffs, firing. And the irony to that, after all the dirty work was done, that HR VP was let go. How's that for an irony? So it's the world we're in. It's the life we're in, the corporate game. And I get it. I mean, they're always searching and pursuing the opportunities for refinement, streamlining, generating more revenue, shareholder happiness ultimately is what you're trying to get from that. And so the idea behind working in that environment that was heartless, pointless, toxic, just didn't make a lot of sense to me in the last few years of my working career. Do we get older, dumber? Maybe I've just grown older to a point where I start to see what my priorities are. I start to see what I love living life. And you know what? The great outdoors, that's a bigger priority than being cooped up in an office in the corporate game. And you see, there was many times where I didn't even want to go into the office. I was sitting in my truck, just shaking my head, almost in tears. I was almost in tears. Actually, probably was in tears on moments, thinking about a lot of things. The career, my future, loss, parents. It's that was life in a nutshell. And I dreaded going into the office. Just to put on that fake. Like, I would almost literally have to shake it off, do a little bit of that. Psych, and then go into the office. Then I was primed and ready to go. Then I'd head straight for the coffee machine, fire up a big brew, pound that one back, go fire another big brew, and then I was ready to meet with some of these people. Were there a few good ones? Absolutely. That's probably the only thing that kept me going as long as I did, was that there was a couple that were, that I did kind of resonate with. But just know this, coworkers are not your friends, because anyone, doesn't matter if they're friendly or not, will easily throw you under the bus. And so, working in that environment made me realize that it was a trap. The Matrix was a trap. I was in a cage. Think about it for a second. A place where they let you out. Like, it's almost like jail. Think about jail with conjugal visits. That conjugal visit was that 2-week vacation. Yeah, that's right. So, living that lifestyle where you've got your 2-week conjugal visit, and the rest of it was you were locked up in jail, being harassed, chastised, pushed around, bullied. Yeah, it sounds like jail, doesn't it? Sure did feel like jail to me. Yeah, so those two moments that I spoke of, the one when it actually happened on February 28th of 24, and the moment where I initially knew that I was done, but I hadn't made a move yet. Because there was that time, and it was right after I came back from Portugal the second time. I get back to my office, a pile of mail, 362 emails waiting, a manager that just had a meeting with me to drop a newfound expectation on my desk, only to have that taken care of by lunch, and then watch my manager sail off for lunch with his favorite peer, one of my peers. All of that sort of balled up into one premonition that I would be retired much sooner than later. And I was not going to do the 65, 67 nonsense. Because people are dying in the 60s. I heard a CEO BlackRock chat going on there. Okay? Think, perhaps, at least what I saw on a short little clip here recently, where there's a conversation about how people are living longer because of those Ozempic and chemicals and drugs that are helping people live longer. It's saving, issues like kidney and liver and all kinds of other dysfunctions that people often have and health conditions. And there's this justification that we should be living longer because back 50 years ago, people only lived to retired at 62 and then passed away at 65, 67. Well, it's still happening. Okay, maybe people are living longer. We know the average life expectancy is 76. But people are getting ill at 65, 66. So that's kind of still the same. There's a difference though. Somebody has a heart attack, they've got medicine now that can prolong it. Maybe they put a new valve in. Okay, he buys you a lease on life. He talks about other things. Again, kidneys, livers, and But a lot of these people are still dealing with dialysis. A lot of people are on chronic cancer treatments, chemo. Is that a life? I don't think that's much of a life. So what they're doing is elongating life, but they're not necessarily improving the health quality per se. I mean, in some cases they might. Diabetes is one where you can probably manage that a little bit with medication. But realistically, there's a lot of people that say lifestyle is a bigger, better way to manage that. So it's the big pharma conversation, and I'm not opposed to it. I think at some level we need medication for this or that. It's just part of our life. And does it help? I think in some levels it helps. It does, gives us longer lifespans and in some cases better quality of life. But I've seen so many cases to validate that. So many cases, these miracle treatments, all they do is make you live longer, but not better, and you're just torturing yourself for the next 5 or 10 years. And it doesn't make it better. And so I do believe in lifestyle, quality of life, eating right, getting exercise. I truly believe in those things. But most importantly, recognizing that life is kind of short. Enjoy it. So no amount of rhetoric or any of that justification by federal leaders and government and so quote unquote insurance experts are going to tell me that people are living longer, therefore we should retire later. That's the biggest crock this side of the Rocky Mountains. And quite frankly, after experiencing my moments in Portugal and spending those days with the kids, and then of course a couple years ago we did Italy, further justification and verification and validation to my thoughts as to why I'm glad I'm retired. Am I working? I'm working. I don't have a job. I don't have a paycheck or a boss. I'm working. Everybody works. I'm out going to be shoveling snow. I'll be working there. Then I'll make another video. I'm going to be working there. But those are passion things, and those are things that we need to do. Do you need to brush your teeth? Sure. You need to do it. Get it done. Move on. That's working in some regard, in some level. I see anything that we do as a task is work. But this isn't a job, and I don't have a boss. And I'm glad I'm done with that game because life is short, and I'm going to live it the way I want to live it. And I know I'm regurgitating a video that I did in the beginning because this sort of, in essence, is very similar to what I did at the very beginning. But it's not. It is, but it isn't. That was sort of laying out how I got here. This here, in fact, is recognizing that there's a moment in your life where you recognize that life's more important than work. And I recognized that right after getting back from that second time in Portugal. The first time I saw it, but it didn't totally resonate because we were so much immersed in our careers and mortgage payments and that. But as you get older in life and you realize it doesn't matter. Those things don't matter that much. You need a roof over your head. We need to eat, absolutely. The big thing I recognized was after that second trip, I started creating the plan. I started recognizing maybe we need to start trimming down on expenses a little bit. Maybe we don't need all these big cars. Maybe we don't need that next upgrade. We'd probably be, we had talks at one point, me and my wife, about maybe upgrading the house again. Not lately, but there was a time when we considered selling this one and upgrading again. But believe me, you and me, that ship has sailed. If anything, we're looking on trimming down, slimming down, and lean, mean, fighting machine. We definitely want to live life more now and a little less focus on having the big house. Don't care. We've even talked about once the kids are grown, like pretty much moved on, we may in fact sell this house. We might just move out to the acreage, which was the original plan in the first place. Because it's an honest, lower cost home. It's in the woods, it's peaceful, gets us away from all this chaos in the city. But there will be that trigger for you. And maybe this video is that trigger for you. I know my videos have been triggering a lot of people, mostly in a good way. Every once in a while, I get a few trolls that reach out and say, look, I'm an idiot. You gotta live, you gotta work, you gotta do this. Why don't you work till you're 90? You gotta be productive, otherwise you just die. I'd rather take my chances on enjoying my life in the way I like to do it. And I know I've been motivating many people, and I'm glad, because I really do think that there's more in life. Now, we do have to have a plan. I don't want to be irresponsible about it and say, just quit. Have a plan, because after my second trip, we started planning. We started thinking ahead a little bit, started looking at what pensions might look like, start talking to an accountant. The housing thing, we basically shut off an upgrade there. Did we buy cars? Sure, but lower cost cars that don't necessarily create a huge commitment. And we did that. My wife needs a newer car. I don't mind driving an old jalopy. I drive the old Ram. That's okay. I'm fine with that. Although that being said, I might exploit a new toy coming up soon, but that's only to satisfy life experience and not a grinder car that gets banged around on the streets that's depreciating like a rock. Either way, life is short. And I found that trigger. And that's why I quit the Matrix when I did. I really hope this resonates with all of you, because that moment when your company hands you that cell phone and says, hey, it's a gift. That's not a gift. That's not a gift. That's got strings attached. Every time you go into that and you got a paycheck, there's strings attached. Every time you have a meeting with your boss, there's strings attached. And even with that door open policy with the big smiling face that says you can say anything, speak in confidence, there's strings attached. Anyway, as always, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Lovely talking to you today. As you can see, I'm going to head out there, shovel some walks, sun's shining, but it's still minus 30 out there. It is cold as sin. So I'm going to go out there and maybe just do a little shoveling. So love to hear your thoughts down below. And above all, please do subscribe if you have not a subscriber, but you want to understand from the mental health, physical health, the perspective of what it's like to retire early, and somebody who dove out of the corporate grind and decided to live in his own special way. Definitely want to check out more videos. Do subscribe. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you real soon. Bye-bye.